Hello, welcome to my channel. I've been trying to upload a new video about every 2 weeks, and so far I've been doing pretty good. We're off a day here and there, but this video today is about something that's honestly really close to my heart, something that I'm really surprised that I haven't done a video about before, and it is about auditory processing disorder. I have seen it referred to as central auditory processing disorder, but I don't know the difference, and maybe that should in itself constitute me for not being allowed to make this video, but this is just my thoughts and opinions and a basic gist of what it is, plus some other connections that I've made that could possibly be linked to autism. Basically, with auditory processing disorder, you do not have to be autistic to have this, and also not everybody that is autistic has this. So it's kind of in that same vein of alexithymia, where it is pretty common for a lot of autistic people to have this, but it is not, if I'm not mistaken, it is not something that is required, but it is common. And it is something for me that the very first video that I ever watched about autism, which was the video that made me think that I might be autistic, or that made me want to look more into it, I should say. The main things that really, the first things that really clicked with me was the things having to do with auditory processing disorder. So as per usual, I am not the best with the proper dictionary definitions of this stuff. So, auditory processing disorder basically deals with four main things, which is auditory discrimination, auditory figure ground discrimination, which has to do mainly with setting, auditory memory, and auditory sequencing. I'll kind of be breaking down more as to what those specifically mean, and also something that while I was looking into the specifics of auditory processing disorder, this is something that I found from somebody, so these are not my words, but I really liked what they had to say, so this is not credit by me, but I wanted to add in this video because I think it is a good introductory to what it means. Basically, APD means that somebody has functional hearing, but the brain to ear communication is off. So basically, you have trouble filtering, sorting, isolating, prioritizing, recognizing, processing, and remembering auditory input. So it has nothing to actually do with my ears aren't good and I have trouble hearing, and it has all to do with almost the signal between the brain and the ear. So it's nothing that can be necessarily fixed, but it has nothing to do with something that you can go to a doctor and try to get help for, really. It just has something to do with more the neurological end of the hearing spectrum, basically. I feel like APD has been mislabeled a lot in society, and the main reason, or the kind of boosting reason as to why I wanted to make this video, was because I was I think I have selective hearing, and I was that must be it. I must have selective hearing, or selective listening, or people also call it selective auditory attention, or kind of what can be phrased as cocktail party effect, are all things that it can kind of get, I think, incorrectly lumped under, because when I started to look into selective listening, selective hearing, all that kind of stuff, I was yes, that's the effect, but that's not the cause, if that makes sense. And that's what made me remember, oh yeah, auditory processing disorder, I haven't thought about that in forever. After I started looking more into selective hearing, I was no, that's really what I'm thinking of. I just haven't kind of thought about it in a long time, that I forgot about it, and I was this is what it is. I think that selective hearing and APD are two different things, but very frequently, I feel can APD get confused for selective hearing, just based off of the premises on what people see on the outside. Again, I don't really know if this is true or not, but that's just kind of the vibe that I was kind of feeling, when people don't know that they have autism or when they have APD, and people on the outside are just oh, they're selective hearers, and I'm that's sometimes the case, but that I don't think is always the case, if that makes sense. A lot of times what can happen with APD, one of the most common things, is listening but not really being able to take in the information. I think a big thing with APD is really not understanding where sounds come from. I think it's that kind of classic feeling of you're out in public and you're walking down a busy street and you hear a police siren. The person without APD is going to be oh, there's a police siren, it's right there, right? But the person with APD, and I find myself doing this all the time, is going to be what? Where? I I will really have no idea where a sound is coming from. There have been many cases where, like, even in my house, I'll be like, oh, something weird just happened downstairs in the living room. And then my roommate will be like, no, that happened upstairs in your closet. I have no fucking idea why you would think that happened downstairs. But I would be like, no, that absolutely came from downstairs. Like, it can just be really, really hard to distinguish where certain sounds come from, and even more what those certain sounds are. I also just have really weird hearing where it's almost as though if I'm not looking at the person or looking at the sound being made, like if it's a dog barking and I'm not looking at the dog and seeing the dog bark, I won't hear the sound. That's kind of a confusing thing with APD, is there can be hyper sound sensitivity in some cases, and there can be the complete opposite, and you can have a real lack of being able to hear fucking anything. Like, I've joked since I was really, really young and knew nothing about autism or auditory processing disorder that I was like, I'm fucking deaf. I was like, I am so deaf. You have to repeat things 1,000 times to me. And I just constantly say, what? And then, like, even when you do talk, I'm like not hearing you correctly. And so I'm like guessing the sounds that I think that you said, and it's not that at all. So I've always just kind of like clumped it into the phrase, like, I can't hear things, but it's not the case. I don't have fucked up hearing, or I can hear fine. It's just the connection between my ear and my brain that has trouble. If anybody's interested in astrology, I think that this might have a lot to do with having Mercury retrograde natally in your birth chart. I'm not saying that everybody with APD has to have this placement, but I think that that can be a very common thread. I'm just wondering if anybody find that as well, because I have Mercury retrograde in my birth chart, if I wasn't clear, because it talks about all kind of about like the internalization of thought and sound. But yes, back to what I was kind of saying before, like, I need to look at the person to be able to know that they're speaking to me. I know when somebody first introduced me to APD, they use the analogy of you're walking at school and you hear someone say your name and you're not really sure if they said your name, so you just keep walking, or you hear your name and you're just like looking around frantically like a complete fucking idiot and they're like right ahead of you, you know? Because I know that stuff happens to me all the time. Like, I also won't know if somebody's speaking to me. I'll just hear a vague sound. It'll be really hard for me to work it out. Like, I really think a huge thing with APD is like really needing to see the person that's talking to you to be able to hear them. It can almost feel like your ears can only pick up on the tunnel vision of what your brain's seeing. Or I guess maybe that's exactly what it is. It's like because it has struggles with the brain to ear communication, if your brain isn't picking up what they're saying, then your ears can't pick it up either. Maybe that's the thing. Like, maybe with APD, those things are like linked, whereas with people without APD, those things are separate, and so they don't need to be looking at the person to distinguish the sound. Maybe that's like the problem. Like, I don't know. I feel like that would make sense. So having trouble sorting out background noises, like I said, like some things can either be way too loud or way too quiet. Another thing with way too quiet is like what I find myself doing a lot is if somebody's saying something, right, and I can't really hear them, I will just kind of like make up in my head what I think they're saying. Like, my brain will almost kind of try to like fit together their weird sounding consonants that were very mumbled, and will try to make a sentence forming what the words that sound the most like them. Like, a lot of times I'll find my friend will be like, oh, did you go to the shop today? And I'll know that I'm not hearing them right. And I'll be like, listen, I know this isn't what you said, but I just heard, did my cat just hop? Like, you know, like, I know that's not it. So it's like, I will even be aware that what I'm hearing isn't right, but all I can hear is what my brain decided it was anyways. And like, you know, that has a lot to do with hearing these muffled syllables, but not hearing the words that they're actually assigned to. Something else is like also when you can really feel your, I guess, like APD acting up, I guess would be how I guess I would say it. It almost sounds like the sounds are coming from like a muffled voice, like underwater or like almost in glass. I really think is what it sounds like to me if like somebody's in like containment of glass and they're like trying to talk to me, where you hear but it's really muffled and nondescript. But then on the other end of the spectrum, so I just said like, oh, I'm so not sensitive to sound. I'm also hypersensitive to sound. And this is a common thing with autistic people as well. Like just it kind of goes into the lens of sensory issues issues in general. The classic example, which I think is so accurate because this is something that totally resonates with me, is like when, you know, if you're in the car and somebody has music on and the music is so loud, you're like, I am so sensitive to the fact that this music is 2 notches too high than it should be. It needs to be exactly 2 notches lower or else it's gonna drive me crazy. Like I have a very specific setting that I have to set my sound to be able to hear it correctly. And I will notice, and it will really drive me crazy if the sound of something is 1 notch too high or 1 notch too low. If it's too high, like I almost hear like a ringing going on in my head. And if it's too low, all I hear is that like muffled behind glass kind of effect. Like it's very specific and very extreme. And you can't always have control over the sounds of things, but that shit can really fuck you up. Like I totally get it, bro. Like I also use the analogy of like, I haven't gone to many concerts in my life, mostly because of my autism and like this stuff with the close crowds. But if I go to like a concert or I see live music, I've seen live music since I was a little kid, but like that noise when it's so loud, like I will come home and it's not just that I will hear the ringing, like I will sleep with it and it'll infect my dreams and I'll just be so much more affected. My head feels so loud. Like people always say like, oh, I hear ringing in my ears after concerts. Like, whatever. No, my brain activity feels like it's so much higher and I will like catch myself subconsciously screaming in my head because the noise is still almost like bouncing off of it, if that makes sense. Something I will say about the sound being too low that I want to add really quick is captions. I feel like everybody with APD needs to have captions on in their movie. Like if I'm watching a movie, it doesn't matter the volume. It does not matter if it's the perfect volume that I want. If there is not captions, I will hear their voice as though it is music, and I will only be able to pick up on the tone and inflection of their voice, but I won't be able to input any of the sound that I'm actually hearing, like the words that they're making, and I'll just like kind of line it up in my head with music and I just won't catch anything. So if I don't watch a movie with captions on, I'll forget that they're talking. I wish if I could, I would have captions on in real life too, because I struggle so much with hearing what the fuck people are saying. So now kind of combining the two, right? Where there's a sound that's really loud, like let's say music's going on. That sounds loud, that's the main sound. But then yet somebody else is trying to talk to you. People with APD will have a lot of trouble distinguishing the sounds. Somebody without it will naturally be able to be like, this is the background music and I'm listening to what you're saying. But somebody with APD is like, those two sounds will be at the same amount of like a lot, and you won't be able to just pick up on one sound. It can be really hard to just pick something out, like pick one sound out of the crowd and hone in on that. You'll kind of just wind up hearing this onslaught of all the sound. APD really has to do with the ability to, you know, pinpoint, focus, and hone in on one particular sound. And so like at a party, it can be so fucking hard because if there's music playing on in the background, and even if I'm looking at that person, I'm making full eye contact, they're in a close vicinity to me, they're talking at a good volume, I still will not be able to hear it because my brain cannot distinguish the background noise with the other noise. Like even to the point where it's like if I'm watching a video and the video is the only sound that's going on, and my roommate comes in and he starts to tell me something and that video is still going on, I can't do it. I won't hear anything he's saying. I won't be able to pick it up on anything. All I can hear is that background noise, and it's like almost the longer it goes, like the louder and louder it gets inside my brain. So I have to ask him to repeat himself a lot. Just in general, you wind up making people repeat themselves a lot, which can be really annoying, and I find that loses a lot of friendships or what it may be, or just, you know, you lose out on a lot of conversations because people don't want to have to repeat themselves. And so it's like if they wanted to say something to you, but you're asking them to repeat it like 3 or 4 times, they're just gonna give up eventually. Like understandably, they're just going to give up eventually. What's also interesting about auditory processing disorder is that you may think like, okay, so you have a trouble with multitasking, like hearing 2 things at the same time, doing 2 things at once. Like maybe it has more to do with the fact that you just like, you can only focus on one thing at a time. But that is not the case for me at all. I am the world's biggest multitasker. So much to the point that like I'm somebody that if I read a book, I need to listen to music while I'm reading the book, or else I won't be able to concentrate on the book at all. And the thing is though, is that when you're reading, you're not taking in any sound. It's silent. So I constantly need that one sound input to kind of like distract half of my brain, and then so the other half can fully focus on the book. And that was something else that I was wondering about with APD, is I feel like maybe a lot of people are the opposite, where they need a lot of external stimulation to be able to stay focused on it, where it can help if there's music in a TV show and you're talking to somebody and you're drinking, it can help them stay focused on that one thing. And then internally, there's like maybe one thought going on that has to do mostly with the conversation, what they might say next, or this or that, or something simple like, what are they eating tonight? Like there's one thought going on. Whereas I'm wondering is with APD if it's the opposite, because I know for me, I always need 1,001 things going on in my brain. So basically what I'm saying is that I feel like I need a lot of things to be thinking about, to be pondering about all the time. And externally, I can only deal with one thing going on because I need so much more mental stimulation on going up here that I can only take one thing going on, sound-wise out there, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering if that's one of the major characteristics of APD is in another thing of it, it's just like the opposite. It's like almost like an extreme introvert. Like, cause I can get so bored inside my head so easily. I need things to constantly be thinking about. I need things to constantly be going over. And I can get mad at the outside world because it's making me waste time with that, My camera cut off, but basically I can be so into the conversation that I'm having in my head that I can get so into it, and answering to the outside world can feel like basically a burden or unwanted distraction. So this is what I think may be the reason behind many kids not answering to their name as a child, or taking a longer time to respond to things. That's a very common thing you see in initial signs of APD, and I feel like the cause behind that is just being so up in here, and more interested too about it. Speaking of music, because I was mentioning music and reading, I cannot understand any word in any song ever. I never have any fucking idea on what they're saying, and it's not until I look it up years later, super begrudgingly, am I like, is that what I've been listening to this whole time? Because my brain associated that so differently. And I know that's a super common relatable thing, but I feel like it's just that extra bit more when you have APD. It's just that, extra bit more where you really don't know any lyrics to any song ever unless you looked it up or it's the title name. Another thing big with APD is learning style. I feel like a lot of people with APD need to either, read what they're learning or physically do what they're learning. I feel like being told, listening, being recited to lessons and not having any visual or reading or movement kind of material or way of backing it up is not going to be an effective way to teach that person at all. I know I struggle a lot when anybody is teaching me something and they're just dictating it to me, and they're not even just using your body language can help me sufficiently, but if they're just dictating it, I won't catch up on it at all. Having somebody dictate to me instructions too, do this, do this, do this, they do this. Even directional instructions, I'm like, if you don't write it down, I will not be able to format it and input it at all. I have to see or do, especially see the thing that I am learning. And so this can get people with APD in a lot of trouble at work when they're being dictated these rules, or they're being dictated the way to do something, but they're not being shown, or they're not given a thing to read. It's just kind of like in one ear out the other, and it can be really, really impossible to understand. And so that can put you at a real disadvantage. And again, that classic thing of needing them to be repeated 1,000 times, which is really annoying. Even I'm always the proofreader of the household. I don't know if I really deserve that role. And if somebody's like, hey, can you help me with an email? I'll be like, sure. And then if they read that email to me, oh my God, that's a joke. I'm not understanding or comprehending anything that they're saying to me. But the second you just put that in front of my lap, I'll read it in fucking 0.2 seconds and be able to fix it, right? But if you dictate it to me, I don't know what the fuck you're saying to me. Also, I'm not fully sure how these mix, but struggles with reading comprehension. Even though I just said I'm able to comprehend things, but at the same vein, I find myself needing to read things over and over and over again to be able to fully understand and comprehend them. And I think that just again has to do with the fact that if your brain is only reading the book and it's not entertained by something else, it might have a lot of problems picking up on that. Now, again, this is just my experience. This just might be my Gemini in the 12th house talking here, but I think this is a common thing with APD as well. Sorry, I have to shed the jacket. It's getting a little hot. It's getting a little warm. I need a bit more free reign, you know. This is what my real shoulders look like, in case you were wondering, with those mega shoulder pads and the other thing. Also, going back, why I the other day was like, I must have selective hearing, is because like also my thoughts can be so loud, or I can be so invested in my own thoughts, and it's almost like I need to finish my full thought that I'm thinking before I can listen to this thing that somebody else is saying. And it can be really hard to prioritize the thing that they're telling me over the thought that I want to finish. I just find that all the time, like I'll almost kind of get mad at people for like interrupting my thoughts, even though like they totally have all the right to talk and it's probably been silent for a while. But I'll totally get mad at that, and I'll have a lot of trouble switching from one thing to the other. And that's why I was like, I must have selective listening. And then I was like, no, it's just more that like I need to finish my internal thought, you know? And sometimes that can always go and keep going and keep going and keep going. And that's also that introverted thing, I think, as well. Also, and I think this is just a common autistic trait as well. But again, these two don't overlap, so I think it's good to say this. My nails match so well, finally. Anyways. Basically, a difficulty with keeping up with long-term conversations. They can bore you really quickly. You can get really exhausted from the constant sound. Like, it can almost feel like taking in sound can be a very exhausting process and a very exhausting filtration process almost, because it's almost like everything that people say, you have to first then hear it, then you have to identify it, what it is that they're saying, then you have to deconstruct it, then you form your own opinion about it, and but by the time that's already done and you fully thought it out, the next person's already talking about something else, and then they're doing that all again, and 15 minutes go by and you haven't gotten a sentence in, even though you've had good things to say, you just don't know when to interrupt them, which is mostly just an autistic thing. And so long conversations can just be really, really exhausting. I know that I've been in many cases where I've been listening to people have really long conversations, and I can leave that feeling so drained. Also, another thing is that I also read somewhere that APD can be very much exaggerated, like right before, during a meltdown, and after a meltdown. That sensitivity to sound and that struggles with a differentiation can exaggerate. And I have to say that, speaking from first-person experience, that is very true. I remember, I have a story that I feel like is the ultimate like APD kind of situation, where I went to see 2001: Space Odyssey with my roommate, who at the time we were not as close as we are now, and we were going to see one of his favorite movies, 2001: Space Odyssey, and it was in the Dome, if you know what that is, the Cinerama Dome, and it was like an amazing surround sound or the classic film print. I don't know any of that stuff, and if you know anything about that movie, it is just the most excruciating sounds all the time, constantly. And so I was practically going to have a meltdown, and I didn't want to do that because we weren't super close, and I was in a movie theater, and I was about to freak my shit out. I was losing it, and then all of a sudden the fire alarm went off, and so we were escorted out, completely unrelated, and that sound also fucked me up. And then we went outside, and when I tell you that the cars have never been as loud as they were then, oh my god. The car noise as they were passing by as we were outside was so loud, it basically hurtled me into another meltdown. And normally car noises can be very soothing. I don't mind them at all. It's not something that bothers me. But at that moment, boy oh boy, did it fuck me up, and was I crying in the corner. My friend was really nice. He took me home, and I have yet to see that movie again. I mean, that is a different kind of torture to me. Like, I like stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable, but that was not the kind of uncomfortable that I ever want to be feeling. Okay, I like Nathan For You uncomfortable, not fucking squeaky, ratchety ass clanky sounds. I don't know, like scratches and stuff. And I definitely am scared to watch this movie still. Anyways, something else that I think might be connected to APD is speech impediments. When I was younger, I couldn't say my R's until I was in 6th grade. And I know it's a very common thing for that to interlap. People with autism having speech impediments. Again, it's kind of like alexithymia. It's like APD, where it doesn't always mean that like, oh, if you have a speech impediment, you have autism. But those things do coincide very frequently. And I'm wondering, because I know that when I couldn't say my R's, I also couldn't hear that I wasn't saying my R's. To me, it sounded fine. To me, it didn't sound weird. Like if nobody had ever told me that I couldn't say them, I probably wouldn't have ever known. I feel like speech impediments start at not being able to hear sounds correctly. Not just the fact that you can't, maybe make that movement correctly with your tongue, but it starts in the fact that you're not hearing that sound correctly. I feel like we discount that and we don't think about the input having something to do with it. We only think about the output having something to do with it, but I very much think that they're linked up, because I know that when I was able to start saying my R's again, which it just kind of magically happened one day in 6th grade, I never noticed. I don't know how long I was able to say my R's before it was brought up, but I just remember after school one day, my mom was like, wait a second, are you saying your R's? And I was like, oh, I guess I can say my R's. Like, I have no idea how long that's been going on for. I don't feel like I'm doing anything different. I could just kind of magically say them all of a sudden. I don't think I heard the distinguishment in my head. And so I think that's a big thing. And I think that there is more of a link between speech impediments and auditory processing disorder than we may think. If you have any of these kind of experiences, or like if you had a speech impediment, I would love to hear your experiences. I always appreciate it. Also, I have a terrible short-term memory. I've heard that as being, or just honestly, I have a terrible memory. I shouldn't even say short term. Yeah, it's a problem. Especially something for like small specifics like movies. Like if I watch a movie, the next day I won't remember anything about it. I can really only talk about a movie like right after I've watched it, or else it's just kind of like in one ear, out the other. And I guess that is a common thing for people with auditory processing disorder. Like I definitely need to obsessively write everything down to be able to remember it. It's kind of like one of those classic things where it's like sometimes I don't even need to look back at what I've written down. It's just the act of me kind of doing it kinesthetic and seeing it that makes me remember it. Whereas if you just recite it to me, or if I just see it or watch it or whatever it may be, and I'm not like doing it, looking this or that, it's not going to stick in my brain. And so it's a common thing for people with APD to have extremely, extremely bad memory. Also within that, as you can imagine, like APD troubles with reading, comprehension, spelling, all that kind of stuff. I personally didn't have any problems with spelling. In fact, I'd say I'm the opposite. I'm really good at spelling, but I read that that is a very common thing to come along with APD. Something that I definitely did have trouble with is picking up new languages. I mean, let's be real. If you have APD and you're autistic, you probably had trouble picking up one language in itself, that the idea of picking up another one or multiples is very daunting. I'm wondering if the fact that, learning to speak later has something to do with APD, could also be a factor. I didn't start speaking until I was like 3 or 4, and then I stopped and started again. And then I went to Hebrew school. I was never able to pick up the meanings of words. I was great at being able to read and write Hebrew, but I was never able to actually understand how to speak it, what I'm saying, the linguistics of it. Even when I took French, I was pretty garbage at it. If it wasn't just straight memorization, I was actually having to speak or form a sentence or this or that. It was pretty much impossible to me. And also I've always had a lot of trouble with picking up different accents. I don't really hear the different things that people are saying or this and that. And I've never been able to do impressions, never been able to do accents. Also, my brain can be very finicky. It's like if there's something that's now going on in the background, or a noise was just made or this and that, it's like once I've clicked off from that thing I'm focusing on, it's almost impossible for me to click back onto it. Also, another thing is detecting subtle changes in tone. I think, again, this has to do with autism and just like that kind of social misunderstanding of not knowing what people mean and not being able to read between the lines, not being able to pick up on tone. But it can be even more exaggerated when you have APD. Something else I found interesting, which I think makes a lot of sense with a lot of the distractibility things and, you know, spelling things even that I was saying, is that 50% of people with APD also have ADHD. So it's another common thing that they intertwine. Not ever in my life, in real life, but people frequently ask me online, like on this channel, if I have ADHD because of some things I say, and I can pretty much say that I don't, but those commonalities that you're seeing that you think are ADHD are actually symptoms of my APD. I really don't have that much trouble focusing. I just need to focus in a very specific way, and I have a lot of rules and regulations and this and that, but again, there are a lot of overlaps between the two. So also I'm wondering if that's another thing where it's like people think, especially girls or just people in general, have ADHD when in reality they have autism and APD, and those two things combined make them think they have ADHD, but they don't. They have autism and APD. And there is a distinguishing factor. I could honestly probably do a whole video about the distinguishing factors between autism and ADHD. Something that if you do have APD that saved my life, that's something that I don't know why I didn't do earlier, is sleeping with earplugs. I absolutely have to sleep with earplugs now, and it makes a huge difference. And from the like, I've always had major sleep problems, and I can be really sensitive to sounds that I'm hearing or this and that when I am sleeping and trying to quiet my brain. And so the biggest game changer has been sleeping with earplugs. So again, if you have APD, I would really recommend that. Just really quickly, how to support somebody with APD is just being patient when they ask you to repeat themselves, trying to learn their sound quirks, and just be more aware of them so they're not always having to feel like the annoying person that's having to accommodate them. You know, just as with any mental thing, just don't shame them for being the way they are. And of course, like, I understand if after a while, like, you can get upset, like, it's annoying to have to repeat yourself a lot, and some things aren't worth repeating and you can just let those go. But if somebody's asking you to repeat them, just try at least once and don't give them hell about it. I honestly think is the biggest way to support somebody. Like my friend, when we were watching 2001 Space Odyssey, if you're with somebody and they're having a lot of trouble with the sounds in the environment, just taking them away and honoring them and understanding them. But I mean, I think it's also still good to push people outside of their comfort zones. You know, I know that with going out to the movies, there's always a chance of something like that happening. Like, I mean, especially when I was younger. So, I mean, I know that's always a risk that I take, and I would rather have somebody that would push me to go out and do things and then be understanding if I have struggles than somebody who is too afraid to even like hang out with me because something might happen. You know what I mean? I think doing the former, or whatever, I never know which one is the former or the latter, doing the first one, where you just push that person, but you're understanding when you push them past their limits, they'll get a lot more benefits out of that. Because I still want to live my life. I mean, I still want to try and go to concerts. You know what I mean? It's something that sucks to miss out on. So if you're just somebody that, like, if you guys both know that there's a risk being taken when you're going to this public thing, when you're going to this loud event, when whatever's happening is happening, as long as you both know that and understand that, then it'll all be good. And since I'm pretty much ending the video, I want to end it with my jacket on, okay? Because I miss it. I'm gonna be real. So yes, that is all I have to talk about today with auditory processing disorder. I have lots of links down below if you're interested in seeing me at more facets of the internet for some unknown reason. But even if you don't, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you supporting me. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any recommendations for future videos, I'm always interested. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.